In the early hours of February 27, 2026, Pakistani fighter jets bombed Kabul while 6 million people slept. Ammunition depots erupted in fireballs, visible across the city. Satellite imagery confirmed the strikes. Hours later, explosions hit Kandahar, the spiritual heartplace of the Taliban, where their supreme leader, Hibatullah Akhundzada, is believed to live. 4 border provinces were struck before dawn. Pakistan's defense minister, Khawaja Asif, posted a message that left no room for interpretation. Our patience has run out. He wrote, "Now it is open war between us and you." Open war. Between a nuclear-armed military power and the battle-hardened government it spent 30 years helping build. This is the most direct state-to-state military confrontation between Pakistan and Taliban-ruled Afghanistan since the Taliban seized power in 2021. And to understand how 2 supposed friends ended up bombing each other during the holy month of Ramadan, you need to go back decades. In the 1980s, during the Soviet-Afghan War, Pakistan played a crucial role in supporting the Afghan Mujahideen who were fighting against the Soviet invasion. The United States and Saudi Arabia poured financial and military support into the resistance, and Pakistan served as the main channel for that aid, given that it shared a border with Afghanistan. Pakistan's premier intelligence agency, the Inter-Services Intelligence, or ISI, was instrumental in training and arming the Mujahideen. This wasn't charity, it was strategy. Pakistan wanted a friendly government in Kabul that would provide what it calls strategic depth against India, its rival neighbor to the east. The Mujahideen eventually forced the Soviets to withdraw in 1989. But victory didn't bring peace. Afghanistan descended into a brutal civil war, with various factions tearing the country apart, fighting for power. It was in all that chaos that the Taliban emerged in the early 1990s. And instead of being alarmed, Pakistan saw an opportunity. The ISI began providing substantial support to the Taliban, including training, arms, and money. A Taliban-controlled Afghanistan meant a buffer against Indian influence. It meant a reliable ally on the western border. And the Taliban's strict interpretation of Islam resonated with certain elements within Pakistan, particularly in the border regions. That investment paid off. The Taliban captured Kabul in 1996 and established the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Pakistan was one of the only 3 countries in the entire world to recognize the Taliban government, alongside Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Then September 11th happened, and everything changed. The 9/11 attacks orchestrated by al-Qaeda, which was sheltered by the Taliban, forced Pakistan into an impossible position. On one hand, it was a key ally of the United States in the war on terror, providing logistical support and intelligence. On the other hand, elements within Pakistan's establishment continued to maintain covert ties with the Taliban. The US-led intervention toppled the Taliban government in 2001. The group regrouped in Pakistan's tribal areas and launched a 2-decade insurgency. Pakistan's border regions became a safe haven for Taliban fighters. The porous boundary between the 2 countries allowed militants to move freely, complicating every effort to stabilize Afghanistan. Pakistan even played a significant role in facilitating peace talks between the Afghan Taliban and the United States. The Doha Agreement, signed in 2020, outlined a framework for the withdrawal of US forces. Pakistan's involvement was crucial, given its influence over the Taliban. And then came August of 2021. The US and NATO forces withdrew, and the Taliban swept back into power almost overnight. Given everything we've discussed, you'd think this was Pakistan's dream scenario, their ally back in charge. But in reality, it's been a nightmare. And here's why. By strengthening the Taliban and its ideology over the decades, Pakistan also sowed the seeds of its own crisis. This is where the Taliban-Pakistan comes in, the TTP, also known as the Pakistani Taliban. The TTP formed in 2007. It's an umbrella organization of Islamist militant groups operating along the Afghan-Pakistani border. Their goal is to overthrow the Pakistani government and establish an Islamic state governed by their interpretation of Sharia law. They shared ideology and ethnic ties with the Afghan Taliban, but they operate independently with separate command structures. And crucially, they are at war with the Pakistani state. TTP has been responsible for some of the most devastating attacks in Pakistani history, including the 2014 Peshawar school massacre that killed 145 people, including 132 children. Since the Afghan Taliban returned to power in 2021, the TTP has dramatically escalated its campaign. Violence in Pakistan has surged. In 2025, ACLED recorded over 1,000 violent incidents involving the TTP across Pakistan. Pakistan recorded its deadliest year of violence in a decade, with 3,967 people killed nationwide in insurgent attacks. That's nearly double the number in 2021. Pakistan accuses Afghanistan's Taliban government of sheltering TTP fighters, allowing them to train and operate freely on Afghan soil, and even providing them with weapons, including rifles and drones, according to the UN Security Council. The United Nations also noted in a report published in February of 2026 that al-Qaeda continued to enjoy the patronage of Afghanistan's Taliban-led administration. The Taliban denies all of this. Their spokesman, Zabihullah Mujahid, has repeatedly called the TTP a purely domestic Pakistani issue that's been active for nearly 2 decades. But privately, Afghan officials acknowledge the presence of the Pakistani Taliban in Afghanistan. And on February 27th, when Pakistan bombed Kabul, the TTP's chief, Nur Wali Masood, appeared to confirm the alliance publicly for the first time, urging his militants to take revenge for Pakistan's invasion of Afghanistan. Now, there's another layer to this that most people overlook: the border itself. The Durand Line stretches 1,600 miles through some of the most rugged mountains and deserts on Earth. It was drawn in 1893 by a British diplomat named Mortimer Durand during the Great Game rivalry between Britain and Russia. The line cut directly through the heartland of the Pashtun people, Afghanistan's largest ethnic group and the group from which the Taliban's leadership and most of its fighters are drawn. Afghanistan has never formally recognized this border. To Kabul, the Durand Line is a colonial scar that illegitimately divided Pashtun communities. To Islamabad, it is the internationally recognized western border of the Pakistani state. The Pashtun issue runs deep on Pakistan's side too. Despite making up about a quarter of Pakistan's population, Pashtuns have faced significant discrimination, racial profiling, arbitrary arrests, and even extrajudicial killings by security forces. The Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, or PTM, emerged as a peaceful voice advocating for Pashtun rights. But in October of 2024, the Pakistani government banned the PTM, labeling it a proscribed organization and sealing its offices. This ethnic dimension gives the Taliban a multi-generational support base that spans both sides of the border. By framing their struggle partly in terms of defending Pashtun interests, the Taliban have tapped into something far deeper than ideology. There's also an economic dimension that fuels the hostility. Afghanistan is one of the world's largest producers of opium, and the Taliban have been deeply involved in the drug trade, using the proceeds to finance their operations. Much of this production finds its way into Pakistan, either for local consumption or as a transit route to other countries. The influx of drugs has fueled addiction, crime, and social instability in Pakistan, while the profits from trafficking have funded militant activities, creating a toxic cycle that Pakistani authorities have struggled to break. The porous border makes controlling the flow of narcotics nearly impossible. Pakistan's economy is already under enormous strain. As of the third quarter of 2024, Pakistan's total external debt stood at about $133 billion, an all-time high. More than 40% of the federal budget goes towards debt servicing, leaving little for development. Any further military expenditure could be disastrous. Now, with all of this history established, let's talk about how this exploded in 2025 and 2026. The timeline of escalation reads like a countdown to war. On October 9th, 2025, Pakistan launched airstrikes in Kabul, Khost, Jalalabad, and Paktika, under an operation codenamed Khyber Storm. Their main target was Nur Wali Masood, the TTP leader. He survived. Days later, Afghan forces retaliated, killing at least 23 Pakistani soldiers. Ground fighting continued sporadically. International mediation by Qatar and Turkey led to a tenuous ceasefire later that month. But peace talks in Istanbul in November failed completely. Pakistan's information minister said dialogue failed to bring about any workable solution. An Afghan official said Pakistan made unreasonable demands. Pakistan's defense minister explicitly warned there would be escalation if war talks failed. Between October and December of 2025, at least 70 civilians were killed and 478 injured in Afghanistan, according to UNAMA. Then came February 2026, and things unraveled pretty fast. On February 6th, a suicide bomber at a Shia mosque in Islamabad killed 36 people. On February 11th, Defense Minister Asif warned publicly that Pakistan would take action against militants in Afghanistan before the start of Ramadan if the Taliban didn't curb militant activity from its territory. On February 19th, an attack on a checkpoint in Bajar killed 11 Pakistani soldiers and a child. Pakistan issued a formal protest to Afghanistan's ambassador. Then on February 21st, Pakistan struck. The Air Force hit 7 alleged TTP and ISIS-K camps across Nangarhar, Patika, and Khost provinces. Pakistan claimed over 80 militants killed. Afghanistan said the strikes killed 18 civilians, including 11 children, and hit a religious school and residential homes. The Taliban promised a calculated response at an appropriate time. It came 5 days later. On the night of February 26th, Afghanistan launched what Mujahid called large-scale offensive operations against Pakistan military positions along the Durand Line. Afghan troops stormed more than 50 Pakistani border stations. It was the most aggressive military action Afghanistan had taken against Pakistan in decades. Pakistan's response was swift and overwhelming. Within hours, they launched Operation Ghazab lil Haq, Righteous Fury. Pakistani jets struck more than 20 locations across Afghanistan, including Kabul and Kandahar, hitting Taliban defense facilities, ammunition depots, logistics bases, and military installations. A Kabul resident described being awoken by the explosions. "I was terrified," she told CNN. "Then we heard gunfire. When we looked out of our apartment window, we saw bullet-like flames going up in the sky." She said she couldn't sleep and was still awake at 5 in the morning, fearing what would happen next. "Since the first explosion, the lights of most of the houses and apartments around us have been on. I'm sure every Kabul resident is sitting in fear of being hit by a bomb." The casualty claims from both sides are wildly different. Pakistan's military spokesman, Lieutenant General Ahmed Sharif Chowdhury, said at least 274 people have been killed at the border, though it made no distinction between civilians, TTP fighters, and Afghan forces. He said Pakistan had destroyed 83 Taliban border posts and captured 17 others. Afghanistan claimed 55 Pakistani soldiers were killed and 19 Pakistani outposts were captured. The Taliban said 8 of their soldiers were killed, while 19 Afghan civilians were killed and 26 injured by Pakistani forces. CNN, Al Jazeera, and the New York Times have all noted they cannot independently verify any of these figures from the remote border regions where the fighting took place. Now, the question everyone is asking, in a conventional war, how do these two militaries actually compare? Well, the disparity is pretty stark. Pakistan maintains approximately 660,000 active duty troops, reinforced by nearly 300,000 paramilitary and military police. It's a nuclear power with a modern arsenal, including US-made F-16s, French Mirage jets, and JF-17 fighter jets co-produced with China. Its defense budget reached $6.15 billion in 2025, a 15% increase from the previous year. Afghanistan, in contrast, has a single unified force, the Taliban, estimated at fewer than 200,000 personnel. They lack a functional air force, relying on a handful of aging Soviet-era helicopters and some transport aircraft left behind during the US withdrawal. They also have some quadcopter drones. Pakistan has been modernizing aggressively. At the 2024 World Defense Show in Riyadh, Pakistan unveiled the Fatah II, an advanced guided rocket artillery system with a range of up to 250 miles. They upgraded their F-16 fleet with improved avionics, co-produced JF-17 Block 3 fighters with China, featuring state-of-the-art radar, and invested heavily in cyber warfare and surveillance technology. But comparing these militaries on paper misses the point entirely. As retired Pakistani 3-star General Tariq Khan put it, the Afghan system conducts kinetic operations through proxies, guerrilla warfare, and a war of attrition. The Taliban mastered ground incursions on isolated military outposts during their 20-year insurgency against the US-led coalition. They know the terrain. They know how to exploit it. Ibrahim Bahis, an Afghan analyst at the International Crisis Group, described it perfectly. The Pakistanis have replied by using overwhelming force, and that escalates the latter from Kabul's perspective, which looks at how to respond better. The two sides keep doing what they think are measured responses, but they keep upping the ante. Afghanistan even claimed its drone units conducted strikes on military targets inside Pakistan. Pakistan's information minister said militants from the TTP attempted to launch drone strikes from within Pakistan's northwest, which Pakistan's anti-drone systems intercepted. Abdur Basit, a senior fellow at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies, warned of the asymmetric threat. Drones are a poor man's air force. The Afghan Taliban has drones. They have suicide bombers. They are innovative. He added, any retaliation by the Afghans will be in Pakistan's urban centers. This is a recipe for chaos. And chaos is what terrorist networks seek to flourish. And there's a broader geopolitical dimension making this even more volatile. Pakistan has accused the Taliban of being a proxy for India. The relationship between India and the Taliban has been growing, in particular through diplomatic contacts and humanitarian aid. The October 2025 strikes actually coincided with the Afghan Taliban foreign minister's historic visit to India, and analysts said the timing was no coincidence. Pakistan was sending a clear message. However, most analysts suggest that India's engagement has been primarily diplomatic and humanitarian, not military. Meanwhile, Pakistan has been emboldened by new alliances. Just weeks before the October 2025 strikes, the United States had renewed ties with Pakistan after mediating a brief Pakistan-India conflict earlier that year. And in September of 2025, Pakistan entered a mutual defense pact with Saudi Arabia, stipulating that any aggression against either country shall be considered an aggression against both. That pact gave Pakistan greater security to pursue military objectives while reducing the risk of a punitive response. And in a move that signaled renewed American interest in the region, President Trump called for the U.S. military to regain control of Bagram Air Base, the sprawling former American installation in Afghanistan. China has also weighed in, calling for restraint and offering immediate peace talks, positioning itself as a key mediator with influence over both countries. Russia offered to mediate if both sides agree. Iran's foreign minister urged dialogue, calling on both countries to exercise restraint during Ramadan. The UN Security General urged compliance with international humanitarian law and the protection of civilians. But the clashes on February 27th happened during Ramadan itself, a month United Nations officials had hoped would be a time to broker a peace deal. Despite the October ceasefire, despite mediation by Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, nothing has held. The humanitarian toll is devastating. Since October 2025, Pakistan has kept critical border crossings closed to civilians and traders, reopening them only intermittently to expel Afghans. More than 1 million Afghans were expelled from Pakistan in 2025 alone, and 2.9 million people returned to Afghanistan that year, according to the UN. The suspension of trade has hurt the economies of both countries. In Pakistani border villages, officials have instructed families to evacuate. Those who stayed have been told to shelter in basements when fighting breaks out. Zahar Wali, a farmer and father of 4 from Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, described life near the border. The border clashes have now become routine, and it has become almost impossible to live here amid firing and mortar shelling, he said. When firing begins from both sides, we rush our children into the basements and wait for hours, uncertain of what will happen next. In some districts, local Pakistani officials have urged villagers to take up positions alongside security forces. A schoolteacher named Murtaza Shah in the border district of Karam said some villagers have taken up positions alongside security forces in the trenches and are participating in the exchanges of fire. This is a critical time. We must stand with our forces, just as communities across the border are backing Taliban fighters. Long-standing cross-border ethnic and family ties have frayed in recent months. Pashtun communities that once moved freely between the two countries now find themselves caught in the crossfire, suffering displacement and loss of livelihoods. So, where does this go from here? The CSIS, one of Washington's most prominent think tanks, assessed that the most likely outcome is a de-escalation. Previous periods of escalation have been limited to standoff strikes and border skirmishes. The October 2025 conflict began with Pakistani strikes in Kabul, but ended with a ceasefire. But Pakistan's rhetoric of open war suggests more significant military options are on the table. One option would be a large-scale bombing campaign against targets deep inside Afghanistan. Pakistan's operation received backing from the president, the prime minister, and across the political spectrum. For the Taliban, absorbing strikes on their own capital and stepping back risks projecting weakness to fighters and the public they've governed. As analyst Abdullah Basit put it, this has not been a step-by-step escalation. Not one step has been reversed. We only have moved forward. Tensions may come down temporarily, but in my calculation, there is no going back. Retired General Tariq Khan agreed. This is only the beginning, he said. Pakistan asked the Taliban to control the TTP, held several talks along with Turkey and Qatar, but it was not going to work because the Taliban refused to take responsibility. Tamim Bahis, a Kabul-based security analyst, boiled it down to one unresolved dispute. Tensions have been largely driven by Pakistan's repeated accusations that Afghanistan authorities are allowing the TTP to operate from Afghan soil, which Kabul has denied. He said, as long as this core issue remains unresolved, attacks will continue. The irony of all this is almost unbearable. Pakistan spent 3 decades building the Taliban into what they are today. It has trained them, armed them, funded them, gave them sanctuary, and diplomatically recognized their government. And now Pakistan's defense minister is declaring open war against the very force his country helped create. Meanwhile, the weapons being used against Pakistani soldiers include American equipment left behind during the chaotic 2021 withdrawal. approximately $7 billion worth of military hardware that the US had transferred to the Afghan government over 16 years. The Afghan Taliban now uses some of those same weapons against Pakistan, the country that helped them retake the government that inherited that equipment. Pakistan's information minister, Ataullah Tarar, called the Taliban an illegitimate regime that actively sponsors cross-border terrorism, institutionalizes slavery, and orchestrates the systematic erasure of women and minorities. Afghanistan's Mujahid responded on Friday, "We have always repeatedly emphasized a peaceful solution, and we still want to find a solution through dialogue." Qatar was already mediating again by Friday evening. Its Minister of State spoke with both foreign ministers in an effort to de-escalate. But as of now, Pakistan says its operation is continuing. The graveyard of empires is stirring again. And this time, the gravedigger might be the one who built the tomb.